it's gonna be alright.
Last week, yet another LGBTQIA++ hashtag started trending on Twitter. Now, of course, this isn't anything new. I mean, even whilst recording this, there's probably going to be another hashtag that has replaced it. But the one I'm talking about today has offered a fairly interesting look into the wonderful world of non-binary. Yes, I know I've mentioned non-binary on this channel a number of times, usually in my Trans Stupid series, but I've never really taken much of a look at it rather than just critiquing what I'm seeing in the news. And I thought if I'm going to take a look into this magical world of many genders, what better place to start than the non-binaries of Twitter showing us exactly who they are. Now, the hashtag was known as #IamNonBinary, and it featured a whole spectrum of validity, a plethora of pronouns ranging from they/them to they/she, they/he, he/she/they. Some actually changed depending on the language. And we also saw non-binary women, non-binary trans women, non-binary men, some who use female pronouns but don't you dare call them a girl, furries, but everyone, no matter who they were, was beautiful and valid. And if you disagreed, well, they'll just slit your throat, that's all. Now, to most people who stumbled upon this, they're probably none the wiser as to what being non-binary actually means. Now, what we got, however, was what I'm going to probably quite controversially say is the real truth of being non-binary, and that is nothing. Non-binary is meaningless. It is a pointless identity. It literally means nothing. And I'm going to explain why that is. But before I do so, I want to make one thing very, very clear. This is not an attack on non-binary people so much. I am not going after individuals. I am not condemning individuals based on them saying that they are non-binary. And I do not support anyone who goes out and harasses, threatens, doxes, does anything bad to these people. They are still human beings. What I am disagreeing with them on is their actual identity as it is. And if this is to be a free platform, I need to be free to do so. So what is non-binary? We need to really kind of clarify what that means. And before we do that, it might be helpful as a point of reference to explain what being trans means, because the two are often quite connected, and you will often see LGBTQIA++ organisations and groups kind of mixing the two in, but saying that they're effectively the same thing. So you probably have watched my channel if you've seen this video before, so as you know, I am a transsexual woman, a trans woman, if you will. I am a trans woman because I was born biologically male, and I have a condition known as gender dysphoria. That means that I am very uncomfortable with being perceived, with basically being male. So what I did is I transitioned socially and physically to be something that I am a lot more comfortable with, that I'm a lot more relaxed and happy with. And I think my transition has been quite successful. I'm sure there's going to be someone in the comments telling me it's not, but whatever. Ultimately, though, there is a clear point of reference for being trans. That is, you transition from one gender, so to speak, to another, to the opposite gender. You went from male to female or female to male. And when you look at transsexual people, you will see that, yeah, people who used to be female looking like men, people used to be male looking like women. You've got a point of reference there. So with all that being said, what is non-binary? Well, we got a couple of definitions from Twitter, helpfully enough, so let's go over a couple of them. So, according to Twitter, it means literally having dysphoria by being perceived as male or female. It means not being restricted to the gender binary, and it means someone that doesn't identify as either male or female. Now, already we kind of have a problem, and I'm going to have to go through each of these points to kind of pinpoint why that is. So let's start with dysphoria. Now, this is actually a fun one because If you're a trans person and you're anything like me on social media, you will often be told that being trans doesn't mean you have gender dysphoria, and that there are trans people who do not have gender dysphoria. So that also applies to non-binary, believe it or not. And you can't say that you have to have a dysphoria to be non-binary. So no, it doesn't literally mean you have a dysphoria for being seen in that way. On top of that, a lot of these people don't have a clear discomfort with being seen as the sex that they are. And when you go into a couple of these pictures, you will see that there isn't really much of a sign of dysphoria for a lot of these people who are apparently non-binary. You get men with beards looking manly, just using the word they. I somehow doubt changing your pronoun is enough to really alleviate any kind of dysphoria you may have. And similarly with women, when you have someone who uses female pronouns, chooses female pronouns, looks like a woman, and then says, "Don't you dare call me a girl." Like, how does that actually work? That is in no way dealing with any kind of dysphoria. Now, while staying on the subject of dysphoria, I just want to quickly mention about how having dysphoria is a medical condition, which means it has absolutely nothing to do with ideology. Now, that would sound quite obvious, wouldn't it? I mean, with trans people, you can get trans men and women ranging from all the way to being communist to some even being fascists, and most people being in between. Now, I mention this because if you look at non-binary Twitter and various non-binary media, you will see there is a very particular political belief system, which they seem to only have, and nothing else. You don't really see, for example, non-binary people coming out as being conservatives. They're more obsessed with Marx than Mises. But it is a legitimate thing. You don't see non-binary Tories, you don't see non-binary Republicans, you only see them in Labour and the Democrats. And if this is to be a medical condition, I don't quite understand why it only shows up in people of a particular ideology. So let's leave the medical side of it for the time being and instead focus on this idea of not being restricted to the gender binary. So, for example, you could be a man who is very much into dresses and makeup, or you could be a woman who's quite butch and wants to do lots of butch things, play footy, drink pints of beer, smash that binary. But the truth is, a lot of people have been doing that for a very long time, and quite prominently so. And hell, this has been going on all the way since like the 60s, even earlier than that. You have icons like David Bowie and Boy George. You have so many women, most of whom are lesbians, and guess what? They are not non-binary lesbians, they are women. They're proud to be women. They're just doing what is considered more masculine things. Your activity doesn't dictate your gender. You can be a boy and into ponies. You can be a girl and into monster trucks. Take those at whatever extremes you want. But a lot of people, including whether it's drag queens or butch lesbians, they don't stop being men or women for the most part. They are still men and women. They want you to know that they are men and women, and they don't want to just have to stick to a particular hobby or particular job. And saying that you are now this magical new gender because you don't fit in with either of those two, it sounds like you're the one who's making more boxes to put people in, rather than tearing it down. But then there's the not identifying as male or female, and this doesn't really mean a lot in practice. So the hashtag showed a spectrum of non-binary people, and there were a lot, mostly female, who looked female but didn't want you to refer to them as such. But that is not going to happen. I mean, a lot of this is good if you just want to sit in your head and think, well, I'm not a man or a woman, but the Mr. White van man with his pint of stout on the street is not going to see you as anything but the way that he looks at you and thinks whether you're a man or a woman. So you just deciding that you no longer wish to be identified as male isn't really good enough if you want society to treat you in that kind of way. If you don't, then what's the point? Why are you announcing this to the world? What impact does any of this have? People can daydream about them being all sorts of things, but it's only real world actions that can possibly make that a reality. Androgynous non-binary people can kind of pull off them not wanting to be seen as being male or female, but according to Twitter, a guy with a beard can also be non-binary because he calls himself a they. So at least you have some people who are trying to look like the way they want society to treat them, but then you have the weird crowd that kind of pulls everyone down. But here's the thing with non-binary. See, I've been discussing the various criteria that has been presented over Twitter, but ultimately, none of this matters. Absolutely none of it. There is literally no criteria to becoming non-binary, except for one. And that is that you say you are non-binary. That's it. That is all it takes, according to so many people who are apparent experts in why it is why non-binary is a thing. You do not have to do anything except for just put your hand up and say me too, and that is it. So therefore, the word has no meaning. It cannot possibly have a meaning. You can't just self-identify into things and expect it to still mean something. We have these discussions all the time, especially when it comes to the trans community, and quite prominently with the definition of woman. You can't just self-identify into being a woman because that makes the term woman null and void. It needs to mean something if trans women want to transition to it. We have to have an actual end goal, otherwise everything is meaningless. And that completely ignores women who haven't been asking for any of this conversation at all. Now, obviously with non-binary people, there isn't quite the same circle that won't really need a discussion on this, but you've made a phrase and you said that it can apply to everyone and anything. So why am I talking about this then? If it's completely pointless, if there is nothing to being NB, if it is a complete waste of time, if it isn't even really that much deserving of respect, why am I talking about it and why is it important? Because it's not enough that they have these definitions that they can't meet, and it isn't enough that they don't matter anyway, but they are expecting you to believe it and for you to follow along with what they say. So it is demanded that you believe any of these identities, and there is to be no conversation, no tolerance of disagreement. You must believe this new reality, no matter what. And this makes many of their clapbacks null and void as well. I mean, you might point out that noun gender isn't actually a thing, but I've encountered people in real life who have defended noun genders and moon genders and planet genders, as ridiculous as it sounds. I had someone on my Facebook identify as Jupiter, and that had to be respected. That was the tolerant option. You'd get dogpiled if you disagreed. You must give them the hugs and the solidarity. And if you dare disagree with these people, well, there are consequences to this. For example, there's Maya Forstater, who quite famously at the end of December lost a court case because she didn't have a contract renewed because of her views on trans people. Now it turns out one of the people who she apparently awfully misgendered was this guy, Gregor Murray, who I've labelled in the past as the least effort non-binary person I've ever seen. But Gregor is a they, and Maya actually got in trouble for not referring to Murray as a they, and as a result lost the contract. And then you get dragged in the media as well. Like, for example, recently, Boy George got in trouble with the likes of Pink News because he disagreed with all of these new wonderful magic pronouns, saying that he really needs to log out of Twitter. I mean, this is a gay icon, one of the real defining queer artists, and you have 20-year-olds who have barely left their parents' house telling him how to be queer. Because this is current year again. And you can also find yourself removed from social media. For example, Facebook have recently updated their terms of service, which makes misgendering a hate crime. And whilst this is related to trans people, we do know that people get removed from social media for the crime of misgendering. Good old Yaniv, who may or may not be in jail when this video comes out, has got plenty of people removed from Twitter for refusing to use female pronouns for this. Neat. But if you're not getting removed from these websites, you still receive a lot of abuse. My friend Ariel Scarella got told she is plague on the earth for daring to question these people, and I got a barrage of it myself. I was called a hog, I was called a bootlicker, true scum garbage, I was told to shut my white ass up, I was told I have cis tears. That's not really much of an insult. Thank you, actually, that's quite nice. There were so many more out there, and you get this on a daily basis if you disagree with them on it. Whether you do it in a polite way or not, they do not care. They just froth at the mouth and go for the jugular. And if any of this isn't enough, have you seen the threats of violence that they put up? Respect my pronouns or I'll slit your throat. My pronouns are he/them only. Use them or I kill you. You'll have your nipples sliced off. Now, I know that some of these are just going to be fairly weak attempts at edgy humour, but I think that a lot of these people would probably rather hide under a duvet than actually take action, but violent rhetoric is very common amongst this group. It sometimes even makes the headlines. And these are the same people who aren't adverse to mocking the deaths of people they disagree with, whether it's from cancer or suicide. So there is something quite dark with a lot of this, and in a way you don't actually know where the limit really is. Is this just going to be online, or are they going to join Antifa and go over to Portland? Who knows? Now, the problem with this is there's a desire to force people to accept something that really has no meaning, and it just won't work. So what can non-binary people do to resolve this? Now, I know that I've been talking about why I think non-binary is meaningless, but this is based on the definition which is constantly being paraded to us. I have absolutely no doubt that statistically there must be at least a handful of people who are non-binary, and they think that there is more to it than just self-ID. They might get insulted at the idea of people saying that they are non-binary and all they do is change their pronouns, or just change absolutely nothing at all. There must exist. And what they really need to do is to actually start reclaiming what it means to be non-binary and put out an actual definition. I often get called true scum or trans med or a gatekeeper, but all of these things are actually important, particularly the gatekeeping part. If you want a word to keep its definition, you cannot have an open border. Everything needs to have a meaning, and that's one of the things that I fight for with my channel. And I do think that there are non-binary people out there who need to do this, because right now, the identity that they have is a joke, and things will only get worse. So what are your thoughts on this topic? I know I normally release a Trans Stupid every Tuesday, but I've decided to start shaking things up. And also, as I'm recording, I don't know whether there's going to be a particular story breaking or not, but if you enjoyed this kind of thing, please let me know in the comments, because I do want to be doing more videos like this, sometimes instead of a Trans Stupid. So if you like it, please let me know. You can support me on Patreon and Subscribestar, and I really appreciate all the many subscribers that I have. You can also purchase some merch on the merch store if you want to help me out that way, or just spread the word about my videos, like and subscribe, and follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. And a special thanks to Alex Meadows, Casey Adolphson, Dan Norman, Finella Cooney, Holly Mahone, James C. George, Janine Caron, Jess, Joanne Woolley, Kim Vandry, Latin Creature, Lizu Desu, Muy Felicita, Nova B, Ricardo Jose, Stephen, Tennessee Barfly, The Poor of Rizzo, Trana May Girl, Stephen Hassan, Green Potato Chips, Laisha, James UK, and the rest of my supporters on Patreon and Subscribestar.